te whare o Waipapa tau matarau me ki, nā reira nei mai, haere mai, ki mai, ki te mihi atu ki a koutou. Mihi kau ana ki tō tātou matu i te rangi, moana marakitunga ki a mātou, i mai nei tēnei wā, nā koe e ka. O tira me maumahara hoki, i a Peter Gibbons hoki i tēnei wā, moi mai rā i te rangatira, moi mai rā. Koutou e tai mai nei i tēnei wā ki te whakarongo i tēnei rangatira i konei. Tim, kei te mihi atu ki a koe, mai haere mai i roto i tō tātou whare, i roto i tō tātou wāhi i konei, o Waipapa tau matarau, mai nā te whātua rāke, mai ngā manu whenua i konei, kei te mihi atu ki a koe, mai, haere mai. He kōkō te ngākau ki te whakarongo ki a koe, me tō hononga ki a rataponga hoki, me tō hononga ki a ratama ki tērā o ngā wahi, me tō māma hoki mo taua itia the silent one hoki, nā re ki a koe, ki a koe i te rangatira a hone, te manukura o te whare tai ao. In English, I'd like to extend a more traditional welcome to everybody this evening, particularly remembering those who have passed on as well, and of course this lecture series of who it's named after as well, we just need to honour Gibbons too at a particular time, but also our rangatira that are here, in particular our rangatira, who is going to say some more words about our esteemed guest that has arrived here as well. And also our rangatira here, also of computer science as well, who has told me he's going to be singing elaborately for our Waita Tautoko, our song afterwards as well. Nā reira ki a koe, ki te mihi atu ki a koe, i a māni o te ki a kōrua hoki, i ngā tangata e tā mai nei i tēnei wā. Nā reira ki te mihi, Kara mai tātou. So I'll hand it over now to Arlene to say a few welcoming words as well. To our lovely guest here, and then we'll have a Waita and start.
Thank you, Tariki, and kia ora koutou. I'm John Hosking. I'm the Dean of Science at Papa Tongarewa at the University of Auckland. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first of the 2023 Gibbons Lectures. These lectures were established 15 years ago in memory of Peter Gibbons, who was an influential leader in the computer science department, now school, and who had considerable influence over the shape of the department and its curriculum. Many of us, including myself, owe a great deal to Peter for his mentoring. While we're remembering those past, I'd also like to pay homage to Ian Whitten, former professor at Waikato University, a major world figure in machine learning, who left us last week, a great loss. This year, the theme of the Gibbons lectures is generative AI. Since the release of ChatGPT 4, it was rarely a day when some form of generative AI system or application is not being reported in the popular press. While it might seem that these tools have arisen out of nowhere, that is not the case. It's more that the quality of what they're producing has approached the level of either usefulness or alarm, depending on your point of view. And I'd note it's usually alarm that attracts media attention. While ChatGPT has grabbed headlines for its abilities to produce text, other neural network image generation tools like Dall-E, Midjourney and Stable Diffusion have reached close to human-level art generation. So I'm delighted that we have Tim Gibson, an expert in the use of generative AI art tools, with us this evening. Tim is a graphic designer, illustrator and comic artist, has worked for Weta Workshop, The Garage Project, Te Papa and Le Monde Diplomatique, to name drop just a few of his clients, while also authoring and developing Moth City, a genre-bending digital native graphic novel set amidst war, rebellion and dissent, where the strange side effects of a 1930s bioweapon jeopardise a small East Orient island and threatens to tear both families and empires apart, which sounds disturbingly close to modern reality. Tim is going to tell us about his experiences of generative AI in the creative sector, posing and answering two questions. What can generative AI be used for, and what impact will it have on our creative industries? and the people who work for and engage with them? And what could a world look like where creativity is free? Tim, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thank you.
And to welcome Tim as well, we're going to sing our waiata too, our waiata tautoko. So if I could get everybody standing, please. It's a beautiful waiata that we can sing together. If you don't know the words, just mime with us. It's okay. So, after me. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mari e, tātou tātou e. Beautiful. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mari e, tātou tātou e. Kia ora mai tātou katoa. Beautiful singing. E noho tātou. Thank you.
Cool. Is that working? Cool. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the very warm welcomes. I've come all the way up from Wellington, so hopefully I make it worth your while. So I'm talking about AI and the new creative revolution. I think we've had a pretty good introduction of the general topic, so we'll switch on. A little bit about me. And this part of the talk is me trying to give you a little bit of tech cred and a little bit of art cred at the same time so that you take me seriously. I've been using Photoshop as a digital illustrator since like PS5 when there was like a weird eye on the logo. I've been a nerd for ages. Used to read lots of Ray Kurzweil books. Got obsessed with sort of like living forever from like Audrey de Grey. Read lots of sci-fi, built my own PC, do lots of gaming. And then in terms of my creative work, I've kind of all over the map. Probably have like the most ridiculous CV. I've been a creative director at Garage Project, do comic stuff, animation, 3D animation, photo bashing, pixel painting, concept design, brand stuff, art director. So I'm kind of, as it says, I am a generalist and a forager. And I will use those skills somewhat here tonight, hopefully. So there's some smart people here who have a whole bunch of different disciplines, which I have no business trampling on, but I will be trampling through your gardens of knowledge to pick a couple of like flowers that I like to make a little bouquet at the end. So from being someone who was super interested in like what technology could do for me when I was in my 20s, when I read all these books and got obsessed with it. I'm now 40 and I've got young kids and a career, and like the idea of the singularity is near is suddenly like a little bit terrifying for me. Here's a quote that I quite like. 1960s futurists: automation will free mankind from meaningless tedium to focus on creative pursuits only human beings can master. 2020 Trek Bros: we're building AI to write all your books, music, and TV so that you can focus on the meaningless tedium of your cubicle jobs. So I think one of the reasons I got invited here is towards the end of last year, I sent a pitch to the people at Spinoff, and I said, this stuff's pretty amazing, this stuff's pretty scary, I'd like to kind of like test it out in a bit of a public way. So I spoke to my ex-employers at Garage Project, and I said, how do you feel about me giving briefs that I've done for you as an illustrator and designer to, it was Dall-E at the time, and just publishing the results, and we'll sort of see what happens. So I think I did about 5 or 6. The results were mixed. I think one of the quotes that I used was like trying to use this program is like using an illustrator who like doesn't follow instructions and just goes on weird tangents and like doesn't answer your questions and then just like never gives you what you want, but it always looks kind of cool, but it's not necessarily useful. I said it better than that in the article. So here are some of the things that it spat back. So I'll flick back a little bit, and you can see sometimes it's close, sometimes it's not, sometimes it just like completely misunderstands the structure of what you're asking for. But there's enough in all of those where I was like, oh, this is maybe a little bit tricky for me. Like, technically, it did some things that I can't do. So I know not everyone here is going to be an illustrator, so I wanted to try and help think about how this might work. So illustration is sort of the canary in the coal mine, in my opinion. Like, it's really visible, the progress, like the ChatGPT thing is sort of followed slightly after it, in my opinion. But it's going to be impacting a lot of us in all sorts of ways. So I'd like you to consider how you interact with creativity. And one of the questions I want to ask is, if assembly lines gave us cheaper cars, what does cheap art give us? And if you're not in a creative industry, is there an echo in the area that you're into? And the big question that I have is sort of like, is this what we want? And if it's not what we want, what might we do about it? I'm not a computer scientist, so I'll do my best to summarize how I understand it to work. Essentially, things like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion are built on large data models, data sets filled with millions of images of all sorts of things, from like beautiful paintings to bad photos that someone uploaded to MySpace. It's learnt from all these things, and then it's sort of figured out how to reverse engineer them, and then it dumps it all, and now it's a little model that can do all sorts of amazing stuff. It's not copying anything anymore. It's learnt, and it's scrapped it. There's also something that I'm calling cross-training, which is where you can take something like Stable Diffusion, which has this understanding now how to make anything you want. So you can say, oh, look, I want a sports car, and I want it to be red, and I want it to be in front of a building, and I want it to be a painting, not a photo. But at any point, you can create a really specific model of, I don't know, Aston Martin cars. Maybe it's not good at Aston Martin cars yet. You can find a whole bunch of images and train it with those together, and now it has perfect cars, but with all the lighting and the painting information from before. And people are talking about that with the language models as well, sort of like, what happens if you combine ChatGPT with New Zealand legal case law? Okay, now you've got like an expert that you couldn't do it before. And how do people interact with them? So the image stuff is still a little bit clunky. It uses stuff like prompts, which are essentially sort of like keyword salad. So it's not as seamless as talking to ChatGPT. It's not like a natural thing yet. I suspect that will change, because why wouldn't it? And at the moment, if you want to do really cool stuff like video, you're actually using a series of tools like in conjunction, one after the other. So you might use ChatGPT to come up with some ideas, and then feed that. That can actually write prompts, feed that in, and then put it into a video thing, blah, blah, blah. Something that I think is really important in the conversation is the speed of this progress. Like, man, it's super fast. And so you'll see some examples of stuff that I've done prompts for you. And there'll be an image, and then underneath is what I put in, what I asked for. And even if the image is amazing, sometimes you'll see that it didn't really follow instructions, even though it looks impressive. But that's changing every day. And that's probably the thing that kind of makes me take this really seriously. Like, we all laugh about the funny fingers and the weird eyes, but like, it's so much better than it was 6 months ago. And who are the players that are involved in this sort of hot mess of development? We've got tech companies and groups. We've got tech enthusiasts and early AI art adopters. We've got artists, writers, and photographers, some of whom feel that this was all built in a way that was without their consent and is scary to them. Some of them don't. We've got creative industries, so people that I've worked for, agencies, concept art studios, through to big places like Warner Brothers or agencies like BBDO. And then we have the clients that we might work for, so that's sort of breweries, airlines, government departments. And when you put all that stuff together, like what do you get from all of that work? You get stuff like this. So this is like just a random page refreshed of Midjourney from like 3 days ago. Just the stuff at the top that was trending. And yeah, it's come a really long way. You don't necessarily know from looking at these what they asked for, but you can definitely see that the quality of what they got, regardless of the content, is like next level. I would be proud to have been involved in any of these images as an illustrator or a photographer. And in terms of when you leave the sort of echo chambers of Midjourney discords and you go out into the wild, you probably recognize some of these. You've got like award-winning paintings and photographs. You've got some fake news. You've got the Pope in a puffer jacket. You've got a ridiculous thing that Amnesty International posted with a fake photo of a woman being arrested. You've got a Vogue cover that was released recently. This one there is this crazy video. It's like a fake beer ad, which it's got Smash Mouth on it, so it's like a total fever dream. And this is what the other thing that you get is you get just like this massive battles in like YouTube comments and Reddit between people who feel negatively impacted by this and people who are so excited about it and they don't want it taken away from them. And there's like a weird thing about like, are you an artist if you use AI, or is it just cheating? I don't care about that, but people do. But the thing that really I think frightens people is it's the speed of it, and it's the speed of how quickly it's developing, and it's also the speed of how quickly it creates. Because it doesn't have to be better than me, it just needs to be faster than me and cheaper than me, and it's faster than me and cheaper than me already. A question that some people want to know or who find really important is like, can it be art? I think it can. That's all I'm going to say about whether it's art or not. And then because I'm in a university, I thought I should give some sort of like historical context. So here's another little garden that I'm trampling across. I want to talk about industrial revolutions because there's some stuff that's crossing over here. So the first industrial revolution, 1760 to 1840. The last bit's a bit fuzzy. Starts in Britain and spreads over the next several decades, first in textiles and then in iron and other areas. It creates huge efficiencies, which means that they need less workers, which means job losses and displacements. Sometimes there's an eventual shift into different work. Early on, the government supports this with incentives, funding, they pass laws, change regulations to encourage this development because it all seems really good. Does lead to some poor working conditions for the people who've kept their jobs, and broadly social inequality and worker exploitation. Yeah, you get fun stuff like the Luddite rebellions, social unrest and political agitation. And then the government starts going, oh, okay, maybe we should manage this because now everyone's really grumpy at us. So they start labour protection, social welfare, worker safety and environmental oversight sort of starts coming in over this period which didn't exist before because it didn't need to. You also start getting the creation or strengthening of worker rights unions and stuff like that. In general, the thing that people say about it is as productivity increased and goods became cheaper and more widely available, people's standards of living improved. Daily life became easier and more comfortable. And the thing that I think is important about all of this is that's actually, I'm sure at the time it felt really fast. It's actually quite a long period of time. Like it took a while. If you move forward, there was a little bit of a gap, and then we had the second industrial revolution, where we got internal combustion engines and the assembly line and electricity. So that's more increases in productivity and the development of new industries like automobiles, chemicals, and steel. Again, goods become cheaper, more families get cars. This isn't the quote, but there's that great idea of like, you're not in the horse business, you're in the transport business. So that all these people who had horse and cart businesses, they were just like, oh, no, I'm not. This is my business, I'm a horse and cart guy. And they're like, no, you're gone now because you needed to pivot and you didn't. But aside from the horses, there were sort of supplementary industries around that. Railways got impacted because everyone was driving. Bicycle producers, no one wanted a bike anymore. Blacksmiths who worked for all of these industries suddenly didn't have as much work to do. There's a few more little revolutions that I'll put there just for completion's sake. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. This is supposed to be a quote by Henry Ford, but it's not real. I did just enough research to cross that out. And I like this one because there's two things going on. First, it totally misunderstood what I said, and then it combined it in a really weird way. I didn't actually give it the quote, you know? Awesome. So car versus horse, like why did this happen? What happened to the horses? Well, cars were much faster than horses. They allowed people to travel greater distances in less time. They were way more convenient. They didn't need feeding, grooming. You didn't need to clean up after a car. And they were more reliable. They never got sick or tired or injured. And they allowed people to travel whenever and wherever they wanted without having to rely on a horse and its availability. And I'm not known for my subtlety, but did you get the little illustrators are also slow, need feeding, grooming, and sometimes at the end of a job, cleaning up after. Now this is a quote from Economist, so it's pretty brutal. I've gone up and down on this talk, man. I love progress. I love my job. And so sometimes something like this makes me feel better, and then sometimes it doesn't. All progress is bad for somebody, Tim. Vaccines are bad for funeral homes. Anything that increases human production is good for human living standards. Some people lose. But if we only want progress that benefits everyone, then there could be no progress. That's Brian Kaplan. But it's not really about cars. And I'm here to talk about creativity, so I wanted to give you some context of like other creative people or industries that have been impacted over time. Doily makers, they used to get made by hand by like these artisanal people who spent hours making a single doily. They were like a super luxury item because of how long they took to make. Gone. They became like a popular commodity during and after the First Revolution. Calligraphers got impacted by the print press, and then they got impacted by digital fonts and digital printing, so it was sort of like a little roll-on. Sign writers, which was a super well-regarded profession in the Middle Ages. All those like cute signs of sort of like the horse and pig or whatever it was, all got done by hand. Again, got impacted by the print press, but then made a comeback before getting squashed again by industrialization. Architectural draftspeople used to draw all these things by hand. They got impacted by CAD software. And then letterpress and screen print houses got replaced by small shops operating multiple digital printers. I think the tricky thing is that it all happened sort of slowly, and these things all kind of exist. Like if you want to be a sign writer, you can be a sign writer, but you won't make any money from it, you know? And there'll be like one in the South Island and one in the North Island. And we've still got printers, but like if you went into a print shop 50 years ago, there would have been like 30 people working there. And now there's like one person working there. So there's a soft culling, I think, that happens during these things. And they all feel kind of obvious now, like of course they're gone. But I feel like it's just the edges are being rounded off with time. So that's what New York used to look like, according to me and Midjourney. But painters, like I'm a painter, I'm not a sign writer really. So the thing that comes up a lot when I talk about AI art, especially with people who like to use AI stuff or people who can't illustrate and just do this or do both, is photography. It's just like photography. So portrait photographers were somewhat superseded by early portrait painters, which lowered the cost of portraiture and gave accurate likenesses. Which isn't a bad thing, right? Because then people pivoted and they started going, oh, well, we're done with that now. We can't compete. Let's do Impressionism and Surrealist art. And maybe we'll start using photography too and steal some ideas about focus and light. Here's a quote from GPT, which I like. This is the only GPT in this whole thing, by the way. Yeah. One of the main concerns of traditional artists was that photography would lead to the loss of their livelihoods. This is me being subtle again. They worried that the ability to create realistic, detailed images quickly and easily with a camera could make it difficult for artists to compete with photographers in terms of speed and accuracy. However, many artists also recognized the potential of photography as a new artistic medium and began to experiment with it themselves. The public, on the other hand, was generally fascinated by photography and eager to embrace it as a new form of entertainment and documentation. And I think there's probably some like professional writers and artists that relate pretty heavily to that. But I think the context with the photography analogy is that speed really matters. And photography has been around for like a really long time before it actually started kind of like eating into things. There was a long development. In 1825, the first photo was taken, what's considered the first photo. Like there were sort of camera obscuras, like even earlier than that. Film was only invented in 1885. Kodak released the first 35mm camera of theirs in 1934. Digital cameras only arrived in the 1980s, and the iPhone was only released in 2007. So like it was it's a pretty long runway to where we are. That is apparently, if you were a traveling photographer, you had to take an entire cart with you filled with sort of like chemicals and metals and probably a whole bunch of poisonous stuff just to do a job. So it wasn't like, there weren't a lot of photographers. Like it was hard work to be a photographer. One of the things that people like me, sort of like professionals in a creative area, like it takes a long time to get good at drawing or painting or writing or playing an instrument, you know. So there's this idea of like 10,000 hours to master something. And that's really starting to come up against anyone who has access to ChatGPT or an image creator, you know. Are we now the same? So when they have the ability to sort of like pull on something that's pulling on millions of images. I wanted to use the Picasso story about the napkin, that if anyone knows. Apparently that's not true. This one is. So this is court testimony from 1878. A lawyer asks John McNeill Whistler, the American painter, about the high price he had set for an artwork he had created in only 2 days. Oh, 2 days. The labour of 2 days then. Is that for which you ask 200 guineas? Which I assume is a lot of money. And he says, no, I ask it for the knowledge of a lifetime. That's him. So like, what do we get? Like, the change is happening. What do we get from it? Like, what are the pros and cons? On the pro side, I've got fun. Like using these tools is super enjoyable. I'm starting to think of the image creators almost as like it's got a slight dopamine hit kind of thing, where it's like an instant kiwi. You put something in, and then it sort of like slowly gives you something back, and it's like, oh, what if I do this way? So there's a nice, and ChatGPT's kind of got the same gag. On the pro side, I would put endless board panda content. So people are just using it for these weird things that, like Wes Anderson does Star Wars, and there's sort of like 8 images that you've never seen before that no one would have spent the time to do in Photoshop. And it used to be that you get cool content like that, I don't know, like once a year, twice a year, and now like every 3 days there's some amazing thing. Because the cost of the investment to do it is so low, people are doing more of it. It's really good. It's opened up accessibility, and I call it skills skipping. So if you don't want to do the 10,000 hours, or actually you're an accountant but you always wanted to be an artist and you don't have time to catch up with me, you know, or if you've got some like disabilities where like this is never going to work for you, that's great. It's got a low investment creative exploration, like for people who are creative. If you want to get started, get rid of like the blank page syndrome, spit it out, easy peasy, and gets things going. For companies, it's going to be a massive, and is a massive productivity boost. And here's a little idea that I have. It's sort of like this idea of nimble, always in development campaigns with veneers. And it sounds like gobbledygook. But the idea is that creative work campaigns that people use to convince us generally start with a whole bunch of strategy that's important, and then they commit to an art style, and then they release it. And if and then it's done. And if that art style isn't cool next year, well, I'm sorry. If the creative was still great, too bad. That's naff now because they're wearing the wrong shoes or the wrong color. Start again. Well, I think they'll probably just be able to reskin it because the creativity now is cheap, like the output. Similar to that, I think art movements are going to start moving like really quickly. We're just going to cycle through it. Trends are just going to be moving really quick. And hyper-personalized marketing. It's going to be super affordable to advertise to all of us with exactly what we want, with people that we relate to in the images and scenes that we relate to. And I'm putting it in the pro and the con category. Pro for companies. Cons, the cult of the new. There's just going to be this speed. Stuff's just going to go out of fashion like super quickly. Fast fashion style, disposable creative. This is probably more important. I should have put it at the top. Massive unemployment. So this is according to Goldman Sachs. This is across all sort of like AI, not just what I'm talking about. But they reckon 300 million jobs, 80% of work globally is going to go. And that's mainly in developed countries. I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet. I think there's going to be a bit of a wealth transfer from professionals to investors. I think there's going to be some resulting social unrest, and with less societal value, people are going to have less personal value. So I think that's going to impact people. And the 10,000 hours thing, it kind of feels like this. So there's a whole bunch of people like me who spent all of our time building really specific skill sets. And we're getting ready for the race, and we've done all our training, and we show up at the start line to like make a piece of art. And then you realize at the start line they're handing out segways to everyone who's just walking by. They're like, oh yeah, I'll go in the race. I'll jump. Hey, I can race. And it's like, I could get in a Segway too, I suppose, but it's sort of, yeah, so I feel a bit like this person. And is it the start of a race to the bottom? Maybe. There's nothing funny in that. You don't have to read it. So art as commodity. Like, once all this happens, what does it look like? We're going to get like a tsunami of content. It's going to be, think about how many photos you've got on your phones that you've never looked at again, and then times that by 1 million. It's going to be a little bit like outsourcing 2.0. So for all of the small companies that are a bit price sensitive, who don't want to use creatives in New Zealand, they can send it offshore to someone that has lower costs of living. They're not even going to do that anymore. They'll just send it to the AIs or someone using AI. Stock imagery is done. The whole concept of stock imagery was that you would go to this vast library and you would literally search for what you wanted, and you would take the nearest thing. And it was never really what you wanted. You know, like you wanted someone who was 6'4" and they were supposed to be on a jet ski, and instead they were on a wakeboard, and you're like, yeah, close enough. The whole principle was like, you ask for what you want and you don't get it, and now you can ask what you want and you get it. So that's over. I have like a chat from 6 months ago with friends. They were just like, oh, stock imagery's done. And then like, they're going to start making, they'll just buy a model. Like, they've got a brand. You go there, you already put it in. They just replace all the stock imagery with a generative art machine. Problem solved. And it's going to get integrated everywhere, you know. So it's all these little connection pieces. It's going into art programs. It's going into Slack, has got it now. It's going into like Teams and Microsoft. It's just... I reached out to a few people in my Facebook circles, and I said, this is a big feely topic. let's all have some feels, let's all be nice to each other. I got quite a lot back. I won't read them, but I will highlight a few. One says, these are all illustrators. That was like, I didn't want Joe Blow telling me what they think about it, because then all the illustrators get angry. So I said, if you're a working illustrator or a comic book artist, tell me what you think about it. One says, I'm ambivalent. The wheel of technological progress cannot be stopped. One that I quite like, that I relate to, is a friend of mine, Andy. Watching the rapid advancement of AI image generation has been a confronting experience filled with excitement, inspiration, confusion, and fear. It has definitely forced me to think about the extent to which my personal identity is linked to my work. I take great pleasure in my craft. The process and the ability to provide valuable services to my clients is really fulfilling. However, the potential threat posed by AI to my work has left me questioning my role. Can I continue to be a useful contributor to society in the same way I always have? The pace of progress in all forms of AI is alarming, and the thought of large chunks of society experiencing those same feelings I have simultaneously is very unsettling. And then, in an ironic twist of fate, one of my old design tutors, who I'm Facebook friends with, didn't read the question because he's not an illustrator, so he didn't follow the brief, but he still wanted to have an opinion, and he says, it's still just a tool. It's not sentient. It requires our creative thought and input. Allowing so many more people to be able to visualize and explore their thoughts is a huge step forward for human creativity that should be embraced. It democratizes the creative act of visualizing that so few have access to. And it might just be my age, but like the last time I remember people getting really excited about sort of like ownership and genuine products and copies was back in the early 2000s. I call it like the Napster era. And people like me, when I was at university, everyone was just like stealing MP3s and swapping them with people, and, you know, seems old-fashioned, and movies. And it was this idea of like, what's a digital copy? Like, I'm not like actually copying something. It's not really real. It doesn't hurt anybody. And copyright law sort of changed around it. Another idea that I used to be interested in too, which I think is coming back. Information wants to be free, from Stuart Brand, who did the Whole Earth Catalogue and the Long Now. And I'm kind of like comparing that to the idea of skill as a scarcity. So like that's essentially what a professional's business model is. You've got a skill, you develop it, you get good at it, and it's scarce, and therefore it's valuable. If it's not scarce anymore, because apparently it's just information, what happens? Chris Anderson, who used to work at Wired and wrote some quite interesting books called Free and the Long Tail, which are, again, like 2000 style books. Every industry that becomes digital eventually becomes free. I'll talk a little bit about the long tail later. And there was all this piracy going on as well. You know, people were pirating software. There was open source, was like this big, I mean, it's always been a thing, but it was a big important thing then. But people were still buying Microsoft products. You know, like Microsoft is still here. And I think Chris Anderson says that the reason that that survived is it's not that it's better, it's just that it's a risk reducer. Like if you've got a big institution, you want to know that if something goes wrong with your software, you can call Microsoft, they'll fix it. Another garden I'm going to trample over. This is where I'm going to talk about law. This is, have I been trained? So not just my images, but like if you've put anything on the internet recently, you know, from a while ago, it's possibly being sucked up in the data. This is a thing where you can search for things. These are all New Zealand companies that I found that have their assets have been part of that data model. So, what are the purpose of laws anyway? There are two ongoing lawsuits that I know of, one from Getty Images and one from a collective of illustrators who are attempting to take, I think, Stability AI and Midjourney to court around the idea of copyright and fair use. Now, copyright wasn't always a thing, like it wasn't there forever. And it kind of goes back to the printing press, where suddenly if you used to write written material, it was laborious and no one would copy it because it took ages, so there was no point. But suddenly the printing press came around and I can just make 100 of that thing that you did in a country over there. And that's a problem, right? Because someone's profiting from something that got done over there, so they're like, oh, you need to have a right to copy it. So when technology changes the status quo, laws need to react. And there's always going to be a gap. It's not going to be like a great thing. And I just made this up. I don't think that this is some policy of law, but to me, I think law follows ethics, not the other way around. So there's lots of debates around the use of generative art, AI. And sometimes it just boils down in the comment sections, of course, where it's just like, well, it's legal, so it's fine, you know. And I think there's a bit of a balance of like, well, legal isn't always ethical, especially when something is changed and everyone's running around reacting because we don't know what to do yet. But I think in general, most people would agree that the goal of copyright law is protect the rights of creators while still encouraging innovation and cultural progress. Here's my World Vision moment where I give you a human face that isn't mine. So this is Greg. He's a guy called Greg Rakowski. He's a Polish concept designer and painter. He's amazing. It's one of his paintings there. He became like a meme in Midjourney, where if you wanted to make your generation better, you would chuck his name in it, because he's in the data set, and he's a really good painter. This is like a couple of months old. His name was used as part of a prompt to create more than 300,000 art generations. So there's like more than 300,000 paintings of his that look like his that he didn't do. Like, talk about like scarcity, like it's just flooded. Like, what do you, what do you do with that? And if those works aren't copies, and there's people who say technically they're not a copy, fair enough. Well, there's something, you know, that is something, and what is it? I've seen interviews with him. When he talks about it, he doesn't just talk about, you know, oh, they copied my art, they stole my art. He actually says, like, it feels like identity theft. Like, he's slaved his whole life to define an art style that's uniquely his, that has all of himself poured into it. And now it's everywhere. And it's not just him, like, you know, the Earth's paintings, sketches, family photos, stock photography, and pornography has all been like found in like some of this training data. And when people like the Midjourney CEO were questioned about it, he was just like, yeah, probably, yes, okay. But getting consent was just like too hard, you know? How do you find out who owns the copyright of an image? And I find it slightly, like, of all the stuff that technology can do, like all of the problems it can solve, like if they try, that feels a little bit. And the large language models have sort of like similar issues, obviously not with visuals, but with sort of books that have been scraped and various other things. So if it's so powerful and it's so amazing and it's so cheap and it's so fun, like, why is it not further than it already is? Well, there's some risks to it, right? If you're a company or an institution and you think, boy, this would really save us some money and some time and we could get stuff done, why aren't you yet? There's a massive ethical stain from the training data, so there's a bit of a PR disaster potentially. There are these ongoing legal things. People don't quite know where it's going to land. And there are, importantly, training gaps. Like all of these sort of data sets, there is a vast lack of cultural understanding, and there is some very bad cultural assumptions, and that goes across sort of like gender and diversity. And the reason for that is because it's all, not only is it all built on us and all of our like collective bad ideas, but it's like us and like the 1950s and the 1940s and the 1800s. It's like not even the best version of us that is coming back to us. It's not even a mirror. It's like a mirror of like the people that were worse. And you can kind of game it, like, you know, when you ask for a doctor, you definitely get a white guy, and you can not ask for that. But I think with all of these things, when when the AI has assumptions, you're not going to catch all of them, and that's just bad news. So copyright, with the litigation, copyright is also acting somewhat as a dam that's kind of keeping this from flooding the creative industries, at least. In places where copyright is not considered quite as important, you can kind of maybe get a little bit of a preview. So this is news that's come out recently that Chinese game studios are starting to use it, and they have had a 40x productivity spike and 70% job losses. So if you were a concept designer in a games company, you've just said goodbye to a whole bunch of your friends, and you used to do like 2 pieces a day, and now they're asking for sort of like 40. And because anyone can do it and all of your friends are gone, you're suddenly working a lot harder than you used to, and you're feeling a lot more pressure. People who are freelancing have said that they've gone from like $1,000 for a job down to like $40. And it's not actually creating art, it's fixing up AI art that has been produced by someone else. So you're like a cleanup crew. Whenever there's been these sort of like big moments, there's normally a few other things that slow it down. So this is not, I'm not saying that, you know, image generation is like nuclear weapons, but I think as a whole, people are thinking that AI, in terms of workforce and humanity, can be as disruptive as nuclear weapons or power, if you want to be positive about it. But there's no resource hindrance, like in access to uranium. You know, this isn't something that's hard to do anymore. There's lots of work that's gone in to build it up here, but now we're here, it's pretty easy. So some researchers at Stanford used Meta's open language model, cross-trained it with ChatGPT and some APIs, and they made like a ChatGPT equivalent for less than $600 and with none of the guardrails. They said that if they had optimized their process, they could probably have done it for less. This was from a leaked internal memo from Google, where one of their engineers was sort of talking about, hey Google, we're not going to win this race. The open stuff's going to get it. The barrier to entry for working on AI models has dropped from the total output of a major research organization to one person, an evening, and a beefy laptop. So there's lots going on. There's legal stuff that's trying to push back. There's artists who are upset. Is it inevitable? Is the genie out of the bottle? I think kind of like yes and no. If it is, what happens in creative industries? Low effort, high impact design up front is going to start becoming a thing that people will see. The 80-20 principle, where 80% of the work is done in 20% of the time, and the last 80%, or the last 20% takes 80% of the time, is just going to be on steroids now. Like cleanup is going to be 90% of the job, and all the glorious stuff's going to happen right early on. Potentially, if the prices come down enough, there'll be like a return of spec work, which normally people like me don't have to deal with. But if you're pitching for like a big, big job, agencies will do spec work, but normal humans don't have to. I think turnaround times are going to shorten really quickly. Clients are going to get impatient. A lot of them are going to want to skip the strategy and diagnosis, which is half of what design is someone says, I've got this problem, I want to achieve this. And you say, hey, slow down. You think you've got this problem. Let's talk about it for a little while, because often the client's solution is not actually the best one, which is why there's a design process to get there. But hey, we'll just skip it. Everyone's going so fast. I think clients are going to want more, and then eventually they're going to want more for less. And this has happened in like once digital photography came out. It's happened 1,000 times. It'll keep happening. We're going to get these like weird, I'm calling them half-baked speed run campaigns, where people are just rushing to get through, get stuff out, get new advertising campaigns out. Doesn't matter if it doesn't work, just do it again. They're so cheap. And the concept of fix it in post, which is a really unfortunate thing that happens in film, I think is going to start impacting other areas of creativity where you can just redo it. You can spit something out, doesn't have to be perfect. If people complain, we'll just fix it, and then release it. It's all digital. We're going to get a flood of nostalgic retreads in music and TV. Have you guys seen the TikTok filters where you put it over your face and it turns you into like a supermodel or whatever? And it's like super fast, it's seamless, it's amazing. People are starting to use that for like old games now. So it's like a frame by frame overlay, looks great. People are going to be recasting movies, like remastered games that used to take years and years and cost huge amounts of money. Done. There's a writer's strike at the moment. One of the things that they are fighting on is whether or not AI can be used to create scripts, either from their work, which might go into a model, or replacing them completely, or asking them to come in and like rewrite an AI idea. Depending on how that goes, there might be something I'm calling infinite IP, which is like Infinity Wars just forever. Like however many Infinity Wars movies you want, you can have them. Made to order media, I think, is going to be a bit of a thing. And low-cost, long-tail media. So long-tail is this idea that Amazon doesn't actually make its money, like when it was just a book company, it didn't make its money from Dan Brown. People thought it did, and Stephen King. It actually made its real money from like all of these really low-selling books that were like the long tail of the sales curve. But there was enough of them, and there was enough people buying them, and shelf space was free. So like it didn't, if you had a real store, you would never stock those books because people only bought them every, 100 weeks. But now, so I think the bargain basement, like movies and media and all that kind of stuff, is going to be valuable again because the cost of production is going to be worthwhile. You can see it on Netflix now. Like there's a whole bunch of like really bad movies on Netflix and Amazon, but there's enough people with really specific wants that they're getting watched. Obviously, the news, fake news thing is going to be a problem. People are already talking about some sort of way to, confirm that an image is real, whether that's through like sophisticated metadata or potentially some sort of cryptographic signature, maybe in a camera, maybe after that. AI fashion photo shoots and celebrities. Even when I was doing that spin-off article, I was finding AI photo shoots that people had done, and you're like, they looked amazing, Stable Diffusion ones. And you're like, okay, the fashion was done, the hair was done, the model was fake, the setting was fake, everything was fake. And you're like, that's like 12 people would have been on that photo shoot, I think there's going to be quite a scary, this is that advertising thing I was talking about, a crossover between big personal data and really cheap creative, as I'm calling them, power ads, and that's where they're going to be able to like target all of us like individually. I'll just be able to make 1,000 ads for everyone in this room, and previously they would have been like using little market segments. Oh, okay, well, you guys are over there, and you're over there, and you're over there, and we'll only focus on one of you. We'll forget these ones. And I think one thing that's holding back probably institutions and big businesses from using them is because of that model problem that we talked about, where that data is and where it's come from. I think people are going to start entering the business of like model creation, bespoke model creation, and that might be for a region. So we might end up with like a New Zealand one that does a little bit better job with sort of the diversity that we have and the history that we have. It might be that people will build an ethical one, which some institutions will buy, whereas it might come at a higher price because it took longer to make, but it's got a little seal of approval that says this AI was built with ethical models. It is change, continuing change, inevitable change that is the dominant factor in society today. No sensible decision can be made any longer without taking into account not only the world as it is, but the world as it will be. This in turn means that our statesmen, our businessmen, our everyman must take on a science-fictional way of thinking. So we can't ignore this technology. Like the genie is not going back in the bottle. We've seen it. It's amazing. It's disruptive in a lot of bad ways, but it's not going away. But can we, maybe shape it better? So this is like half solutions. Doesn't actually solve my problem. Like, I might still be out of work in 5 years. Generative AI is in an arms race. Here's some facts. Progress, profits, and pace are prioritized over people at the moment, and we know the model foundations are both unethical and unbalanced. But we also know that it works, that it's impactful, that there's an appetite for it, and there's a lot of available investment for it. And it's cheaper and faster to build it today than it was 2 years ago or longer, when a lot of these companies were putting in the hard work. So if we can't stop the progress, and this is, I think, not just for me as an illustrator, or if anyone is creative in here, but I think it's something that we all kind of need to think about, because it's all going to impact a lot of us. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Preparing for this talk has been like a real emotional roller coaster for me. Like, I have it's like doom scrolling, and the algorithm, the news algorithm that I have on my phone is like, you've been reading lots of AI articles about the end of the world, here's some more. So like, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I need to be on top of it, so I guess I'll just keep reading them. And so it's been confronting, and I'm like all over the map, because I'm like, this is so cool, and I'm like, this is so terrible. And I came across this, and it's called The Change Curve, and it's after Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's like stages of depression and acceptance. But it's different. It's kind of been like rejigged for a corporate. If you run a company and you want to change something, and all your staff are freaked out because whatever, this is the path they say that your staff will take. And from a management perspective, they have little tips about how to get you from here all the way over to integration. And I recognize so many of these like little moments, low mood, depression, blame, disbelief, and then every now and then some rationalization and experimenting with it, and then back again. Like they have it as a path, and mine's sort of like a ping pong game. And I think the question that we need to go is like, if we can't change it, are we just kind of like horses, or is there something else that we can do? And that's it. If anyone wants to get in touch, there's some contact stuff up there. And then later on, as I promised, I'll put up the other Facebook comments, and if you want to, you can go and have a browse.
Well, I don't have a genie, but I do have a bottle.
Ah.
So make good use of it.
Thank you, sir.
Are you prepared to answer a few questions?
Yes, I'd love to do some questions.
Right. Who would like to ask a question?
Several years ago, I went to an art gallery and got a guided tour. And the theme of the tour was about how artists over the years have, in one sense or another, rebelled against whatever the rules have been that have been set up. So the only example that I remember was that up to this point in time, all of the paintings had been done inside a square frame. And somebody's like, to hell with that, I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about how artists might rebel against this technology in a similar way?
Yeah, I mean, like, you're right. All art movements are essentially a rebellion against the previous one.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell. Like, it might just be that visual arts is just washed away, because what's the point? And so it might be that there's more of a need for the real or the physical. So maybe sculpture will sort of like become like the premier art form. In terms of commercial art, I'm not so sure. But yeah, like it's a challenge which some people will run with. Yep.
So, kind of two questions. One is how much. I've been using generative things for decades now, starting with some very primitive ones, and I found I was like just throwing them away because I didn't care. There was no connection to the creation process. So how much do you think that's likely to be worth? And when it turns out that it's worth nothing, and we are just to be valued for our humanity rather than our utility, what do you plan to do in retirement along with the rest of us?
Probably not paint, hey? Yeah, it's just, it does feel disposable, and I think that's part of the problem. Like when you're doing it, it's fun. It is that little dopamine hit. Like, what am I going to get? Like opening up a Kinder Surprise. Oh, I got this. But people are they're just spamming it, you know, and that's fine. Like I'm totally on board with that. I've got a friend who's made 40,000 generations in Midjourney, and I'm just like, in the same period, I've made maybe 25 pieces of commercial art.
Is there a non-disposable artisanal, you know, the equivalent of an artisanal cocktail or a meal or something like that that will remain valuable at the end of this?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know what people will do. I don't know what you do after this. I think artists will always do art, and they'll find a way to like keep themselves engaged and produce stuff. But I mean, art's never been like an easy career for anyone, and like commercial art is like the best paying version of art, and that's not like a great easy career for anyone either. So it's just it's a bit of a kick in the guts that this is the first thing that kind of feels like it's getting whacked.
This is slightly off topic. I was listening to the report last night on how the deepfake theory or deepfake strategy was being used in courts in the U.S. That there was some Trump video from 2017, I think it was. No, sorry, Elon Musk, where he was saying that, you know, the cars, these autonomous cars, were perfectly safe. And the lawyers were arguing that that video was actually a deep fake. Mm-hmm. You know, and so now legal courts have these two different approaches. One is that deep fakes are presented as legitimate testimony, you know, and the other is to question, you know, true recordings as being produced by a deep fake. Do you see how one could possibly distinguish, you know, in cases like this, whether what's being presented is either deep fake or authentic?
Not at the moment, because it's got to a point where it's so good. And I have been asked by lawyers before whether something that's in their case could be faked. Or someone's been accused of faking something that they think is genuine proof. And, you know, a year ago I would have said, I mean, it could have been faked, like I could fake that, but I would have charged you $10,000 to do so it probably wouldn't have happened. But, you know, so the barrier to entry was sort of like cost, but the cost is going down. So it will continue to be a problem, I think, until we have the ability to embed media, new media. We won't ever be able to do it with old media because that's gone, but if you're making new photos or new footage, it needs to come with some sort of digital cryptographic or whatever it is stamp that's verifiable. Because otherwise, yeah, it's a pointless, you know, no one, you can't tell.
Cambridge High School is cracking with us just at the moment.
I'd like to ask a question that relates to arts and morality. From a young age, we've always been told this question. Take a leap of faith. Now, AI doesn't have life and death. If 5 people were told to jump off the cliff, and it was AI, what would AI do as an artist?
I'm quite sure I gather that. Me as an artist, what would AI do? Or if AI was an artist, would it jump off the cliff?
If AI was an artist, would it jump off the cliff? And it's got 5 lives, but we know it's got more than 1 life.
I have no idea. That's a tough one.
You talked about having young kids.
Mhm.
How are you thinking about fostering their creativity and something that's on my mind?
Yeah, like they draw a lot, which is something that I've always encouraged, and I think I'll continue to encourage it because it's something that they enjoy. And I think it's good to stretch your brain in different ways. But you know, there was probably a part of me, like a lot of parents, would be like, maybe they'll follow in my footsteps, and maybe not. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the worst places to be, and I don't know if there's any students here in that situation. One of the places I would be scared to be in if I was like a second or third year illustration student who had not finished their 10,000 hours, but put in a fair chunk of it, and was expecting 5 years from now that they would be somewhere. And yeah. I mean, a lot of them are starting to use the tools because tools are tools, and you know, the new reality has changed, and what are you going to do? But yeah, tough.
So I think that's probably a good point to stop at this stage. I'm sure Tim will be around just to answer a few more questions individually. Tim, thank you for that. That was a fantastic journey through another area that is being impacted by AI, generative AI. I mean, we grapple with it within the university environment. You're grappling with it within a creative environment. Most professions are grappling with generative AI at the moment. And I think this is a really good start to the series. So thank you very much, Tim.
Cheers.
And if you want to see this talk again, it will be up on the Gibbons website, hopefully not deep faked. So